What was Paul's defense before Felix against the Jewish charges? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Acts on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Acts chapter 24, verses 10 to 21. Before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Acts chapter 24, verse 10. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Acts chapter 24, beginning at verse 10. Then Paul, after the governor had nodded to him to speak, answered, Inasmuch as I know that you have been for many years a judge of this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because you may ascertain that it is no more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with anyone, nor inciting the crowd, either in the synagogues or in the city. Nor can they prove the things of which they now accuse me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, so I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. I have hope in God, which they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. This being so, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense towards God and men. Now after many years I came to bring alms and offerings to my nation, in the midst of which some Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with a mob nor with a tumult. They ought to have been here before you to object, if they had anything against me. Or else let those who are here themselves say if they found any wrongdoing in me while I stood before the council, unless it is for this one statement which I cried out standing among them, concerning the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged by you this day. Paul is standing before Felix, the Roman procurator or governor of Judea, having been sent there by Lysias, the commander of the garrison in Jerusalem. It is not that Lysias found anything that he could charge Paul with, but that the Jews had charged Paul according to their law for supposedly defiling the temple by bringing a Gentile in, something that Paul did not do. Because Lysias couldn't hold Paul, a Roman citizen, uncharged, but also couldn't let him go because the Jews would riot, he passed the matter on to Felix in Caesarea for judgment. In the last lesson, we had heard the Jews' arguments, which basically was that Paul was a troublemaker among the Jews over all the world, that he profaned the temple, and that they simply wanted to judge Paul according to their law. This, of course, was a lie. For when Lysias took Paul into custody, the Jews were in the process of killing Paul without trial. With Paul being a Roman, Felix now turned to Paul to provide his defense. Paul didn't begin by flattering Felix, for flattery wasn't going to get him anywhere. He was going to be honest. If he was set free, so be it. But if he was not, he was going to trust in the Lord, for the Lord had already told him that he would see Rome, so Paul knew that whatever happened, the Lord would stay true to that promise. He begins by reminding Felix that he had been a judge of this nation, Judea, for many years now, meaning that he had the necessary experience dealing with the Jews to know the culture and the politics that go on here. By this time, Felix had been governor for about 6 years, a detail that Paul knew because he had been in the Palestine region before during this time period at the end of his second preaching trip that we discussed near the end of chapter 18. This experience is why Paul was comfortable and happy to present his defense before Felix, for he shouldn't be able to be fooled by some of the Jewish behavior, especially as presented in Tertullus's speech. In verse 11, we get a time frame for the events that began back in chapter 21 and Paul's arrival in Jerusalem, 12 days. There are many different ways people try to reckon these days, all of which are satisfactory, but in so doing, I believe that people are missing the point of Paul mentioning that he's only been in Jerusalem and Judea for 12 days. He's being accused of being a rabble-rouser, a disputer, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. How is he able to stir up trouble in such a short period of time, seeing he spent most of it in Roman custody? Where were the riots or unrests that Paul has supposedly been stirring up? Felix hasn't heard of any or seen any these past 2 weeks. If those charges were true, why hasn't there been unrest stirred up by Paul? Moreover, since these events happened such a short while ago, why haven't any of the witnesses to Paul's supposed criminal actions come forward to testify? Tertullus wasn't there. We didn't even read in chapter 21 that Ananias the high priest was there. Thus, they were only providing second-hand hearsay evidence at best. How can Paul be convicted of any crime under Jewish or Roman law without those eyewitnesses to his supposed crime, especially since they should be able to be produced given the short time frame? Paul knew the law, and he knew how to make an argument, and his argument was strong here. Courts of law, in order to be fair, must have the prosecution producing evidence of a crime, not conjecture. Paul tells Felix that while they call the way, meaning Christ's church, Christians, a sect, meaning a division of Judaism, it is no such thing. Jesus taught the gospel, and through the gospel, Paul worships the God of his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Paul believes all things written in the law and the prophets, which spoke of a Messiah coming to die on the cross for sins, thus fulfilling the entire law. Moses said in Deuteronomy 18, the prophet that came like unto him from among their brethren, they were to listen to, and Paul is doing just that. Moreover, even they, meaning the Pharisees, believed in the resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust, so they're even in agreement on that. Jesus didn't come to further divide Judaism. He came to save men and women under one umbrella, himself. The only reason there is division is because the Jews are rejecting the message of God spoken through the law and the prophets concerning Christ. Why was Paul in Jerusalem? To bring alms and offerings to his people. Nothing more, nothing less. If these Jews from Asia had anything against him, Paul said that they would have and should have been there to accuse him. The only reason that he can possibly come up with that he is standing before Felix is because he taught of the resurrection of the dead, something that is not a crime under Jewish or Roman law. In all of this speech, Paul said he did all things in good conscience. He broke no laws, and therefore he should be set free. How will Felix respond? We'll discuss that, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Acts chapter 24, verses 22 to 27, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.